Alright, so once again I'm back with yet another Nikon lens review. This time I'm going over the 50mm f2. I also have a 51.4, but I won't really be touching on that lens in this review. I'm just going to specifically talk about the 50mm f2. And from my experience, this is one of the most common Nikon lenses. I have 3 of them. 2 are black, just like this one, and 1 is chrome. And I think it's a slightly older design where the front barrel is a little bit different. And I gotta say, this is a common lens. It gets looked over a lot of times in favor of the 1.4 variation, which is a little bit more expensive. But I really like this lens. I think it has an amazing quality bokeh. It's very sharp. It gets a great depth of field. You can pull a nice depth of field even at around f4, f2.8 and f4 for sure. I think even around f5.6 you can get a little bit if you get close enough. As I mentioned in one of the other videos, the one downside of these Nikon lenses is that their minimum focusing distance is something like 3 feet, so you can't get super close. That is something that is a bit of a frustration to me sometimes. But, you know, when you're dealing with these older cameras and lenses, it's just something, that's how they are. You just kind of have to deal with it. I will say I noted if I use this on my adapter, I have an aftermarket adapter that fits on my Sony A7, it seems to be able to get in a little bit closer. It extends out a little bit more, and I can probably focus at about 2 feet or so, which is kind of nice because you can pull a little bit more depth of field out of the lens at that range. So I've shot this lens a fair amount on both color and black and white film, and I generally get pretty good results. I will say that sometimes the focus is a little bit finicky. The field of focus seems to be kind of narrow. So that can be a bit of a frustration because sometimes it will be a little off, but I generally get pretty sharp image results with it, especially when it's in proper focus. The one irritating thing about this lens on these cameras, and for some reason this is only true with these 50mm lenses because they don't have that cuff around the edge, is when you go to infinity focus, it sort of locks itself in place, and you have to either pull this little tab right here on the front and kind of release it, or you can use the focusing ring up on top. There's a little trigger on the focusing ring, and if you hit that, it'll unlock the lens. But it is kind of strange because if you're just trying to focus in the more conventional sense by manipulating the lens barrel, you'll find that it gets locked sometimes, and it's like, ugh, that's kind of frustrating. And I know that is something I've seen a lot of users really hate that. I don't like it, but I grew to recognize that was a thing it would do pretty quickly, and I kind of worked around it and was just aware of it. I also don't use the 50mm lens all the time. I usually use other lenses, pretty much all of which have a cuff on them that don't do that for some reason. So that is a weird little quirk of the lens. I wouldn't count that against it too much, but it can be kind of frustrating every once in a while when it does that. And when you first get it, it'll probably baffle you because you'll be like, what is this? Why is it locking in place? And yeah, it is unusual. So what else can I say about this lens? So obviously it works with the 50mm viewfinder, meaning you can use it on pretty much any of the Nikon cameras equally well. And I would just say it's a solid lens. Kind of like I said with a 35mm lens, it's a good walking around lens. It's small, it's lightweight. You can not necessarily fit it in a small jacket pocket, but if you have a larger jacket pocket or a small bag, you can pretty easily fit it in there with a light meter and a couple extra rolls of film, a very small camera bag, and carry it around. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It's not especially heavy, so it's not really cumbersome like some of the bigger lenses. Like if you look at the 85mm lens, most of those are much bigger, and they're chrome plated and they're very heavy. They're not that big of a lens, but they're very heavy, surprisingly so, and you don't get that with the 50. I think it has good image results. I'll make sure I post a few images. It's like I said, it's generally sharp as long as you don't accidentally lock yourself in infinity focus and take some photos that are out of focus essentially. It pulls a nice depth of field. It has a nice bokeh effect. The background is always really nice and smooth. It has that kind of just very soft, what I've described as sort of a camouflage look, where you can just sort of see like shapes and blurs, but you can't really pull any details out of it. It does that very effectively, and I would say it has probably the most appealing bokeh of most of the Nikon lenses I've used. That's a little bit debatable, but definitely very, very good. And I think it's kind of sad this lens is so overlooked in favor of the f1.4. I'll probably do a comparison later and compare the f1.4 and the f2 a lot more directly. But this is a very sharp lens. It's very, very capable, and I think it's often underappreciated and overlooked. It comes with a lot of Nikon cameras, and I think people deserve to get out there and use it a lot more, because I think a lot of people are missing out, not really using this lens and not recognizing that it is an incredibly high quality lens for its time. And even by modern standards, I think its bokeh and depth of field are pretty amazing. Once again, I will say you do have to be kind of careful with the focus. It is a little, it can be finicky. Like, you need to be really spot on with this because does it have a focusing? You can see there's a focusing scale. It's kind of built onto the cuff, but it's very small. And it doesn't give you a ton of leeway. Like, if you're wide open, f2, f1.4, it's pretty narrow. And even going out to, like, f8, it's not particularly wide, so you do need to be accurate with your focus. Granted, if you open it up a lot more, or, where is it? Let's see, we got f22s out here, which is fairly wide, but not nearly as wide as the other wider angle lenses I was looking at. So this might not be a great lens for like street photography type work, but if you're using it as more of a lens for like artistic purposes, for like portrait type work, I think it's very good. It can be a good travel lens. I've used this when I've been traveling around and I've gotten some really nice shots. Much like the 35mm lens, I'd say it's very versatile. Obviously it's not as wide as the 35, but it is a little bit faster, and I think a lot of people will appreciate that. These lenses are pretty cheap. From what I've seen online, they usually sell for around $100, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. There are a couple of different variations. There's an older one that has more of the sort of inner rim is a little bit different. Those are pretty much always chrome, and you'll just see there's more of a texture you can kind of grab onto, and you can actually disassemble the lens if you really want. Those are older ones that came with the f2 and I think maybe some of the early f3s, and those seem to be of a slightly lower quality from what I can tell. These later ones that are black, I think they're pretty much all black and have the more inset text and everything. These are very good lenses. It's kind of a tough lens because I can definitely say a lot of good things about it. I can give a few negatives with the focus being a little finicky. And I like this lens. I'm not sure I would rank this as one of my favorite Nikon lenses, but I do like it. Recently I've been using the other wider lenses a lot more. I've been trying the 35, the 85, and then the 28. I've been using those quite a bit more. I actually haven't pulled out a 50 and used it in a little bit, so I'll definitely have to try and use them a little bit more. I've shot it on black and white film, and I've always gotten pretty solid results in black and white film. I've shot it with Kodak Ektar, and I got some amazing results. And I was kind of surprised because some people don't really like Kodak Ektar, and I don't always like Kodak Ektar myself. Sometimes it appears way too red, but shooting it on this particular lens, it just worked perfectly. It kind of subdued the colors. There were fairly rich reds, but they weren't overdone like you sometimes see with Kodak Ektar. The sky always looked really nice. The colors were just always very rich. I don't know if there's just some weird trick, if there's something about how this lens is designed, some coating or some material in it just works really well with Ektar, but this lens and Kodak Ektar are a great combination. I know that's kind of strange. Most people wouldn't note specific lens film combos, and I know some people would say, oh, there's no such thing, it doesn't work like that, but from what I've seen, the 50mm f2 lens and Kodak Ektar is the bee's knees, as you might say. It just looks really good. It's got a great color grade, and it looks really nice. I'll make sure I include some sample images. You know, it's hard to know what else to say about this lens. It's a good solid lens. Like I said, I don't know if I would rank this as one of my favorite Nikon lenses. I kind of prefer the wider ones, but I do use the 50 a fair amount, and I have to say, looking at the results, the 50 does yield some strong results, so I can't really complain about it. I can't say too much. People always ask about lens flare and chromatic aberration. I didn't see any chromatic aberration on the color images I shot. I didn't really see any sort of like flaws or lens flare. I wouldn't say there's any distortion, but then again, with a 50mm lens, you kind of hope there's no distortion. There's no vignetting, but of course, again, with a 50mm lens, you wouldn't really expect it. I mean, with some of these older f2s, you might get a little bit, but I didn't see any in this lens. Granted, I don't generally shoot wide open at f2, but I just don't think you'd really get any. Nikon's usually good about not having much vignetting on their lenses. What was the other thing? Someone always asks about... boy, I'm totally lost right here. I usually do pretty good on these videos and just kind of ramble on. But like I said, I think it's a good solid lens. I don't really have any negatives for it. But at the same time, I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite lens. It's kind of hard to quantify, but I just kind of prefer a wider lens, and I guess that's pretty much all my personal preference. So, yeah, like I said, I guess that's just my preference. A lot of people will prefer a 50, saying it's better for something like portrait work, or, you know, it just helps you kind of get a little closer. I prefer to use a wide-angle lens and actually like walk in and physically get closer, which again can be kind of a double-edged sword with these older cameras, because like I've mentioned, their minimum focusing distance is about 3 feet, so you can't get super close. But I could see that being a good reason for having this lens if you kind of want to bring yourself a little bit closer to the action. So I think that's one reason I use it a lot, actually, is because it does kind of fill in for close-up work in a way that the 35s and 28s just can't really technically do because of that minimal focusing length. Yeah, I don't really have much more to say about this lens. It's a good solid lens. I use it a fair amount. I haven't used it as much recently as I did in the past. I've kind of favored the 35s, but I would say this is still a good lens, and it's definitely worth looking into. If you buy a Nikon camera, there's a good chance you're going to get this lens anyways. So, you know, I would say why not try it? Just get out there and use it. Try it with some Kodak Ektar. I got some great results there. I don't know exactly why. I need to do more research onto that because I'm sure a lot of people will say, oh no, that's not how it works. But from my personal experience, that's what I saw. So yeah, a good solid lens to start your Nikon collection off with, and one you'll almost inevitably pick up if you are a collector or buyer or user, whatever you want to call it. And one I use a lot, and I kind of wish I'd used it a little bit more now that I think about it. So I'll have to take it out and shoot it a little bit more from now on. I'm going to include some images so you can kind of go over those and look at them yourself and make your own decision. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of information if you were kind of considering buying one of these lenses, or maybe debating on the 50mm f2 versus the 50mm f1.4. I don't know if this really helped much, but I will say this lens is sharp, and I think it does stack up to the 50 1.4 much more than it's often given credit for. So that's my 2 cents on that lens, and I'll be back with another one a little bit later. Might be a little bit of a delay since I need to gather some more images, but I'll definitely include some images at the end of this video shot on this lens, so enjoy those.